Welcome everybody, I'm Grandmaster Christian Szabó, and my following course will be about the Sicilian Smith-Morra gambit. Which is the Morra? The E4, C5 and D4. This is a very playable weapon against the Sicilian, which has several advantages. First of all, avoids the several main lines which are going on by knight f3. Little bit simplify the situation, and if c takes d4 then c3, so it's a pawn sacrifice immediately. However, white gets some good compensation with the quick development and pressure, especially in the center. Let's see what kind of lines we will see here. Of course, the critical main lines will be the d takes c3, which we will see in the other chapters. Let's see how about d3. This is also a typical move. Black would like to sacrifice back the pawn, doesn't allow the development for the opponent, and but also doesn't want to allow the strong center, like for example compared to d6 or knight c6, then c takes d4, and white even has a really strong center. So let's see d3. Of course, bishop takes d3, and black's idea was that, okay, give back the pawn, however, a c3 pawn will be there, so still white has to lose the tempo with c4 and then knight c3 only, so the knight can't develop for the natural c3 square immediately. d6. Yeah, natural move. How about, for example, knight c6 instead? Knight f3, g6. Yes, g6 is a typical setup, and I don't say this is the only one because I think e6 is also possible. Okay, knight f6 not really, because then with e5 we can attack immediately, chase away his knight, and the knight has to just run away. g6 is a normal, like accelerated dragon stuff, like put the bishop to g7 and try something on a long diagonal. Castle, bishop g7, and c4. As I mentioned before, white should do something with the b1 knight. The knight's natural square is on c3, so knight bd2 is not so tempting move, because not clear what is the knight doing here. Because okay, he can go to c4 from here, but on c4 also doesn't seems to be so powerful, a bit strange. Somewhere we should go with that, otherwise the c1 bishop is tagged, it can't develop, and that's why the a1 rook also can't come out, so he has several problems with that. So c4 is a really natural continuation. d6, h3, also normal, because black would like to come with bishop g4, so usually we are happy to prevent that. Knight f6, knight c3, and knight d7. Knight d7 is an interesting way, because instead of the natural castle, he immediately maneuvered his knight to probably c5, and also sometimes bishop takes c3 is a possibility. Bishop takes c3 is always a question, we will see this later, because first of all he gives up his dragon bishop, very important dragon bishop we called, the g7 bishop, but creates a double pawn for white, so white's pawn structure on the queen side will be extremely ugly. However, on the dark square with the white bishop can make some problems for him. However, let's see if castle instead. So castle, bishop e3, also normal development, knight d7, so very similar. But now there is a big difference compared to the previous one. Now white can play already rook c1, so just in time he arrived, and now bishop takes c5 is nothing, and also after knight c5 the bishop can go to b1 and white is perfect. He just reached everything. Yeah, because if bishop c3, rook takes c3, now it's nothing. It's not a point at all. So knight c5, bishop b1, excellent move. And a5. a5 is also a typical move. Now the pawn structure is a little bit similar, like against the accelerated dragon Maróczy variation. What is that? Let me show you quickly. Knight f3, knight c6, d4, cd4, knight d4, g6. This is the accelerated dragon, and if c4, kind of bishop g7, bishop e3, knight f6, knight c3, d6, bishop e2. So this is very similar like that. And okay, here also black can play for kind of knight d7, maybe it's queen d2, knight c5, f3. This is one of the main plan. So that's why I said it's a little bit similar. So the position was this, little bit similar. Okay, the bishop is on b1 now, and a5. If f5 instead, that would be dubious, because generally f5 is a typical plan, because the knight went from f6, yes, to c5, then he comes with f5, and open up the f file for his rook. So a really good move, really good plan, idea. Maybe not the best, because takes, g takes, queen d2, just go forward, king h8, and rook fd1. So very natural developing move, but white position is more promising. Let's do an evaluation why. Black seems to be stronger in the center, because still his e7 pawn can go to e5. However, it's not easy for him, because the d6 pawn is always weak. Right now it is even hanging also, so e5 is not a possibility, but in a long term also, if for example black protects somehow, the d6 will be a weakness yet, so it's a big problem for him. So white is clearly better here. What is white's plan? White has several good continuations. The most tempting is knight d5, just jump into the center and just provoke e6. If e6, then the knight is going back, for example, and the d6 is weak again, as I mentioned already before. And also, after that we can come with b4 and just go towards on the queen side. The c5 knight is hanging, it's attackable, so this is not so easy for him. Okay, so a5 happened, queen e2, so that's why this is a very normal play. b6, rook fd1. This queen e2, rook fd1 is also a really typical plan and idea, because this is how white activates the f1 rook also. Bishop b7, knight d4. Yes, after some time we should also move with the f3 knight, because that is not sure the best. Moreover, if we move with that, later the pawn can also play to f3 or f4. Knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, rook takes d4, and we can say white has a slightly better position thanks for the space advantage. Generally strategically says black is not bad, because he has actually the good bishop and white has the bad bishop, and he has a stable knight here, but the space advantage is giving kind comfort for white, and he can come with kind of f4, e5, or maybe e5 immediately. Knight can jump to d5, so the b1 bishop also in a long term, it's not a bad bishop at all. Okay, so let's go back. This was the castle. How about knight d7? Now we can understand more the knight d7, because if bishop e3, now it's already different, because for example if knight c5, then with rook c1 we can still reach a similar position. However, only castle would be a transposing when bishop b1, but now he can already take the bishop, and usually we don't like to give up the light squared bishop. But maybe not a big problem, because generally that is our bad bishop, thanks for the c4 e4 pawn structure. So this is also a bit more comfortable for white. Went back to queen d2, go out of the tempos, b6, rook f d1, bishop b7, and a very important point, if we already don't have bishop pair, then we should also exchange for the opponent, so bishop h6, and the strong g7 bishop, we already exchange. So rook c8, b3, and white is minimum slightly better again. It was also an important game. Alright, let's go back. This was the knight c5. How about knight d e5? After knight d5 we have several options. One of that is rook c1, which will be our main continuation, but I don't say this is the only one, because knight takes e5 is also an option. Knight takes e5 and then bishop e2, so suddenly put the bishop to e2, and the bishops are, we can say, harmonic here on e3 and e2, and also maybe with f4 we can come later. If bishop e6 we don't have any problem with the c4 pawn, at least we jump to d5 with the knight, and white is just okay. But rook c1 is also fine. Knight takes d3 would be transposing to the previous knight c5 line, queen a5, and now he already went back with the bishop to e2, where it is completely acceptable. Knight f3, bishop takes f3, bishop e6, bishop e2. On f3 the bishop is not useful, so it was a completely general way to go back to e2. Castle, queen d2, very natural continuations, rook f8, b3. Also typical, very typical to reach this pawn structure, and this is comfortable, solid, safe. Rook a b8, and after rook f d1, white is also minimum slightly better, we can say that. Okay, so this was the knight de5. But let's see the critical bishop takes c3. How about bishop c3? B takes. And as I mentioned before, this will be the critical because black also weaken the dark squares here. So even bishop h6 can also come. However, there are two weaknesses on the c-file. Let's see which is more important. Castle is the main move, but let's see what about queen a5, for example. Queen d2, knight c5, bishop c2, and bishop e6. Let's see how about, for example, castle. Castle is a natural developing move, yes, so after some time he castles, but now it's a mistake, because white has a great break now with e5. Knight takes e5. Let's see what a good pawn sacrifice. What is the idea? If d takes e5, then bishop takes c5, queen takes c5, and we have a great attacking move against the black king with queen h6, f6, because threatening with knight g5, f6, bishop takes g6. Yeah, because knight g5 was threatening with a decisive queen h7 checkmate, so no other way than f6. Bishop takes g6, perfect. H takes queen takes g6, king h8, and rook e1, the queen can't give checkmate alone. But if he has a helper with rook e1 and threatening with the checkmate on the h-file, that is already decisive, and black can't avoid this with a normal plan, with a normal play, because f5 is not working because of knight g5 followed by checkmate, or in case of queen takes c4, we also can play rook e4 and he has to sacrifice the queen for this. So let's continue. That's why with e5 and knight takes e5.